Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to this very special Mother's Day edition of Atlas Information Live. I'm your host, Atlas Alex, and I'm not expecting many people to be here, actually, because it is Mother's Day. And I hope that if you have an opportunity to do so, that you can spend time with your mother today. But if not, and if you are here, then welcome, because we will be speaking about the Divine Mother, the Divine Feminine, in a way today, because we are going to be looking at mechanical nature, mechanicity. And as we all know, there's a reason we call her Mother Nature. There's a reason the environment, the crucible, the womb that serves for us, the nurturing space which can give rise to our inner God, our inner Godhead, the monad, the Atman, our innermost being, who in us is but a seed, a spark. And all seeds require that nurturing environment, that cradle of life, in order to sprout. Just as an egg must be incubated in order that it may hatch. And it is no secret that throughout nature, it is all but ubiquitous that this is the feminine role, the feminine energy, the feminine functionality. The purpose of the feminine is to create that medium of creation itself. The masculine cannot create. God cannot create. But with and through the feminine. Without a medium of creation, there's nothing to create. Nothing can be created. And what is also evident, in accordance with the Alm of Life, in accordance with the principles of evolution and devolution, that which is born of any crucible, of any womb, that which hatches from any egg, is in some way different from that which gave rise to it. And so too, we are here on the path, on a spiritual path, a quest to give birth to give rise to an earthbound expression of our immortal soul, of our innermost essence, our innermost intimate seed and spark of Christ. And just as the seed is planted in dark, primitive, earthy soil, so too our divine spark has been planted within this crude, corporeal, mechanical vessel that may serve, if we know how to master it, as precisely that crucible, the alchemical laboratory, the forge of Vulcan, in which we may be tempered as steel is tempered in the fires and waters, so that our edge may become stronger, sharper, more defined, more precise. This is a universal axiom of all creators, including us mortals. Whether we be artists, engineers, architects, designers, painters, poets, musicians, it matters not. We can be landscape architects. We can be gardeners. We can be graffiti artists. Woodworkers, sculptors. It doesn't matter. You can be crocheting a sweater. But in that moment, when you are engaged in the flow state between you and whichever medium you have chosen to work with, you have chosen to transform, to transmute. And through the creative spark within you, and the passion and the drive and the effort and the energy and the time and the patience and the care and the focused, conscious attention given to what? To uplifting, to transforming, and giving that medium a higher expression of itself. The creative act is giving of yourself. It is a sacrifice. You are giving a part of your life for the sole sake, for the sole purpose of transforming and transmuting some medium of creation such that it can experience a higher expression of itself, such that a slab of marble may be transformed into Michelangelo's David. And now the monad of that stone, the divine essence of the mineral kingdom, that elemental, that homunculi, related to that marble, has now a renewed purpose for existence and has been given. Can any stone anywhere conceive of a more incredible expression within the boundaries of the mineral kingdom? How many beings, how many souls have stood in awe and wonder at the unfathomable beauty that David exudes, expresses, radiates? And yet, ultimately, David is still just a slab of marble. The substance of David has not changed. The medium, the stuff of David is the same stone that was delivered to Michelangelo's workshop. This colossal 18-foot tall slab of marble. Yet over the course of how many months, or indeed years, how many strokes of the hammer against the chisel, was that marble transformed into a veritable angel set in stone. And when you look at some of the other incredible carvings and sculptures that we have seen created throughout the centuries, I'm not good with names, you know that, so I can never remember these artists' names, but there are those sculptures of Mary, right, with the silk veil over her face, and it's and these artists were able to carve stone in such a way that it became silk, that stone may reflect the sheerness, the and the flowing, that's the right word, right, for silk, the sheer, that's fabric. It's unbelievable. It's impossible. It's an impossibility. And yet there it is, set in stone, literally in stone. What is that if not sacrificing oneself to give that brute, crude, corporeal matter an opportunity to achieve its highest expression in its life, for its existence? Because stone's lifetimes are measured in, thousands of years, if not millions of years. Just as in the plant kingdom, trees' lives are measured in the hundreds, if not thousands of years. And as we progress from the mineral kingdom to the human kingdom, lifespans tend to get shorter quite a bit, moving from kingdom to kingdom. And of course, there's a great deal of variability within each kingdom. But the point is that material aspect represents the foundational characteristic of mechanicity, of mechanical nature. Mechanical nature seeks to express, but it also seeks to exploit. Now, what do I mean by that? We cannot deny the fact that creatures, animals, plants, they require energy to survive. And they take that energy from the sources that they can get it. And in order to survive in the contest between organisms, mechanical nature has been given what we might refer to as algorithms. So the algorithm that runs within the psychology of an animal that keeps it searching for food or keeps it eating food, we might call that algorithm gluttony. Or the algorithm that drives any being of mechanical nature to procreate, to proliferate, to spread its seed. We might refer to that algorithm as lust. And then there are algorithms necessary for the physical protection of animals, let's say, in the face of danger, in the face of imminent death. We have the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn algorithms related to fear. Most people talk about this in terms of fight or flight instinct. But if a creature does not have or would not have that algorithm, then wouldn't it wouldn't know to run away from a predator. It wouldn't know to stand up to a predator in order to protect its young, like, let's say, a mama bear. A mother bear protecting her cubs is one of the most dangerous animals in all of creation. A mother bear will stand up to a male grizzly twice her size, facing certain death in order to protect her cubs. Because it's a very cruel twist of fate that male grizzly bears will often commit infanticide. They will eat their own young in order to satisfy their voracious appetites. These algorithms are mechanical. They're dispassionate. This is something that, if you have spent time in nature or have spent a lot of time watching nature documentaries or have witnessed, let's say, lions hunting on the Serengeti, or any of the big cats for that matter, or even your own cat, domestic cat, hunting and killing, you've probably noticed the matter-of-factness of it all, the dispassionate nature of it. Animals don't hunt out of any complex emotional backdrop. They certainly don't think about it too much. And a herd of animals can witness one of their own being chased down, hunted, and torn to pieces by a pack of wolves or a pride of lions, and they kind of shrug it off and go about their business. There's, in some animals, we can witness what we might interpret or process or register as mourning. For instance, among elephants, if an elephant dies or a young elephant is killed, it is possible to witness the other elephants of the herd kind of assemble around the elephant who has died, and it seems like they're performing some kind of a rite or a ritual, that they're taking a moment to recognize the fallen. And There are other examples, of course, certainly when it comes to pets. If you have ever lost a loved one and the family dog um, was very close to that person, then you've witnessed your dog go through a prolonged period of mourning, most likely. If a dog loses its owner, it's very often ends up being fatal for the dog, or the dog. There are many cases of this, like Hachiko in Japan. The doctor who Hachiko would walk with his owner, a doctor, to the station every morning and watch his owner get on the train and go into town, and Hachiko would wait at the train station all day for his owner to return and step off the train. And one day, his owner didn't step off the train in the evening, and Hachiko waited there. He never left the station. Day after day after day after day, Hachiko waited at the station. I believe it was Shigoyu Station in the Kyoto district. I may be wrong on that, but and Richard Gere actually made a film about it. Of course, he said it in America, but the story is the same. The story of a dog who waits for his owner at the station, and this Hachiko's story became so famous that Hachiko was enshrined at the station. There's a bronze statue of Hachiko at that train station. When you get off the train in Japan at that station, you will see it. And in the middle of the beautiful courtyard, they built this beautiful bronze statue in honor of Hachiko. Because in Japan, of course, culturally, loyalty, fealty is highly prized. It's considered to be one of the most honorable of virtues in Japanese culture. So animals can have a very strong attachment, and likewise, that attachment as part of their defense mechanism, part of their the algorithms that they navigate their world with. Again, coming back to dogs and pets in general, have you ever been walking your dog and a neighbor or someone's is walking their dog in the other direction? You stop and you show some love or affection for the other person's dog, and then immediately your your dog shows jealousy, becomes envious. Yeah. So there's an algorithm of nature. That's a defense mechanism. That's a reaction to, oh my god, 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 this strange dog is competing for my master's affections. I got to get in there. I got to put an end to this right away because it's a threat, that other dog. So mechanical nature is governed by these mechanical algorithms. And of course, we can go down the line and we can even get into Newton's laws of motion. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And we've talked about laws like inertia and how inertia in the world of physics translates into sloth or laziness in the higher order, biological, psychological orders of nature. Because what does the law of inertia state? Things like to keep on doing what they're already doing, even if they're not doing anything, right? Objects in motion tend to stay in motion. Objects at rest tend to stay at rest. Well, you could ask for no better definition of laziness. Laziness is simply the law of conservation of energy applied in a higher order organism. That's all inertia is. It's a expression of conservation of energy. Now, you can argue that an inanimate object, like a ball on a pool table, cannot act on its own. It has to be acted upon. But that's the whole point. Because of the law of conservation of energy, it won't exert energy to change its direction. It must be acted upon. It relies on an input. That's the ultimate in laziness. Right? When we refuse to change, when we refuse to move or change the way in which we're currently moving or the direction in which we're currently headed. That's the ball on a pool table, and keep going in the same direction until it hits a wall or it hits another ball. And then you have the action reaction law of physics, which again, expressed physically, it's the law of karma, the law of cause and effect. So these laws are embedded and define the parameters, the rules. They're hard coded into reality as to how things function here on the material plane. And another word for those laws for the laws of physics or the laws of motion. Another word for that is mechanics. The mechanics of motion, the mechanics of physical bodies moving through space. And the application of those laws through what we call engineering and technology form what we most commonly understand as machines. Beginning with things like the steam engine. Well, that's certainly not the beginning. Going all the way back to things like the wheel and the cart horse and the catapult, and right, and we can move forward. Even simple tools, right, hammers and nails, and so on and so forth. That's also mechanics. That's also physics. You might not think of a hammer as a machine, but you might not think of yourself as a machine, and yet that's what you are. The human machine is a biological machine. There's all sorts of physics going on just in order for us to walk, and it's the physics of it is actually quite complex. The mechanics of human movement is quite complicated. It has taken robot engineers and designers decades to be able to make a bipedal robot walk and run and move in a way that resembles human movement. And they still can't do what human beings can do, but they're getting closer all the time. But the point is, it's taken decades, literally decades upon decades upon decades of trial and error, of constant continuous improvement and constant advancements in technology and what they call servos, and in the processing power of the computers, the computer chips, and the sophistication of the software, and yes, even the application of AI, just to be able to make the robots walk upright on 2 feet and be able to navigate the world as bipedal machines. These laws determine the parameters and the functions of mechanical nature. Mechanical nature cannot be separated from determinism. Machines are deterministic. Mechanics are deterministic. That is the very nature and definition of why that aspect of nature functions as it does, and why it is that animals on the Serengeti watch a member of their herd being chased down and torn to pieces by a pack of lions, and or a pride of lions or a pack of hyenas, and they just shake it off. They just shrug their shoulders and get on with their day, because it's just a fact of life. It's just what it is what it is. It's like the gearing inside of a machine is indifferent to the movements of the machine, like the clockworks inside the machine. Gears will move in accordance with how they are being moved. That's the nature of gears, right? That's determinism. And that's very important to understand at the very foundational level of what we call mechanics or mechanicity. Because we, as I've been intimating at and alluding to, we have a very I hesitate to use the word intimate, but we have a highly integrated relationship with mechanicity, particularly in the modern age, in the present world. Just as a as a as a foray into the topic, you know, consider how it is you are participating in today's live stream. Look around you. How many screens do you count? Or just consider that the space that you're in, the home that you're in. How many screens are there? Don't forget to count the one in your pocket. How do you feel if you lose this, or if you leave the house without it? You're on the highway, or perhaps you're on a bus or on a subway, and then you realize, oh my gosh, I left my phone on the kitchen counter. How's it going to make you feel the rest of the day not having this? And let's face it, this, how long has this been around? 20 years? 25 years? Maybe? Something like that? When did the first smartphones show up? It's a good question. According to ChatGPT, the first smartphone was released to the public in 1994. But I think most people associate the first smartphone with the iPhone. And the iPhone was released in 2007. So you think about that, that's not even 20 years ago. So according to ChatGPT, the first smartphone was the IBM Simon personal computer. There we go. Yeah, there it is. It was developed by IBM. It was released to the public August 1994, and it was about $900 USD, or over $1,600 today with inflation. It had a touch screen, email, fax, calendar, calculator, notepad, and phone all in one device. And it's according to ChatGPT, right? It was decades ahead of its time. Well, we know it was decades ahead of its time because along came the iPhone in 2007. This is actually kind of interesting. Let's search Google images. Okay, this yeah, okay, there it is. Well, you guys get the idea. That's Facebook. Open image in new tab. Okay. Oh, jeez. Well, anyway, it's not the best image, but you get the idea. That was the first smartphone, 1994. How far we've come, right? But it's an interesting thing to consider. When you go out in public nowadays, go on the subway or go to a what do they call it? A food court at lunchtime or whatever. And you see all these people, or go to a school during lunchtime, cafeteria, or any break, right? And all the kids are doing this. Everybody's on their phones. And if you lose your phone, or you forgot your phone at home or whatever, you feel lost without it. In the preamble to today's live stream, the description, I posed the question: when does any technology make the shift from a blessing to a curse? Because obviously, machines have a place in our lives. Machines make our lives easier, and in many ways, they make our lives better. Given the law of conservation of energy, it is beneficial to be able to travel great distances in relatively short periods of time and relatively small or infinitesimal exertions of energy. Whereas once people would have to walk for hours, if not days, just to be able to get to um, another village. And there are all kinds of machines that allow human beings to do things that we, given the limitations of our physical machine, our biological anatomical machine, there are machines of all kinds that allow us to do things that we could never do just alone physically on our own. It would take dozens of people working together, for instance, to be able to dig a hole, and still they would not even approach the efficiency or depth or speed at which a backhoe can dig a hole. And that backhoe can be operated by one person. And there are countless examples. I mean, everything from the automobile to the airplane to even the bicycle, for heaven's sake. Now, a bicycle doesn't even have an engine. We are the engine. We provide the power, the kinetic energy, in order so that the machine that we call a bicycle can function and operate. And yet, look how much more efficiently we can move through the world on a bicycle. Just we've all ridden a bicycle, so this is not a controversial statement. This is a universal experience. Just think about how fast you can go on a bicycle compared to even running, even sprinting. How much energy and effort it takes to run as fast as you can go. Now, how long can you sustain that speed just by running? And yet, on a bicycle, you can sustain that speed for quite a long time using a lot less energy. With the same energy, the same exertion of just jogging at a relatively slow pace, maybe 5-6 kilometers an hour. Sorry, that I should no, that's verse. Um, no, it'd be more like 7 or 8 kilometers an hour. On a racing bike, you can be going 35 kilometers an hour, exerting relatively the same energy as you would going at 8 or 9 kilometers an hour jogging, because you can't sustain running for the same distance as you can on a bicycle. So the machine enhances our own energy, and bicycles allow us to do that primarily because of the wheels and the gears and the chain and the way it's designed to transform our kinetic energy into motion and movement through space. It does so in a far more efficient way than our body does, because just because of our physiology and our design. We weren't designed to run at high speed for long distances. But the bicycle enables us to do just that. And if you look at the machine that humanity turned to for long distance travel, prior to the industrial age, you discover the horse. And incredibly, when you observe how the horse's legs and hooves move through space and make contact with the earth, you discover that those four legs are working in a way that it's almost like they're creating a virtual wheel in order to propel the horse forward with incredible efficiency, which is why horses can run and run and run and run and run for miles and miles and miles. And their design, and I use the word design specifically. Their design is such that they have tremendous heart and lungs and cardiovascular capacity, and they are built for speed and endurance. And then you see another interesting phenomenon with the bicycle that you might not think, and yet I enjoy showing these for obvious reasons. Observe, my search query was people carrying impossible load on bicycle, and you just look at what people in parts of the world will carry on a bicycle. Now, can I make that any bigger? I can't, can I? I can't make that window bigger, so I'll just make these windows bigger. Look at this fellow. Those are tires. And look at this fellow here. This is somewhere in Orient. Now, admittedly, that's a tricycle, not a bicycle. So, but you get the idea, right? Still, that show me the person who can carry all of this without a wheeled machine. And here's someone, most likely in Africa, the wood that he's carrying. And then when we talk about machines assisting us, look at the old lady here. Okay, now she's riding a bicycle to the store, and she has the saddlebags and the basket and everything to be able to buy her groceries or whatever it is that she needs to get. And I think it looks like she's outside of a pet store, so maybe she's getting her cat or her dog food or its favorite toy or whatever. And it's the case that for many elderly people, walking, certainly running is not really an option, and even walking can be difficult for them. But riding a bicycle, because it's so low impact and because it's so much more efficient and low impact on the joints and the feet and everything else, that she too can go and buy groceries and carry things and it's a machine that offers freedom and greater capacity, greater ability to accomplish more things that we otherwise might not be able to accomplish. And here's a bicycle pulling a cart. And let's face it, bicycles are significantly cheaper than horses. Horses, after all, are living things. They require food and water and care and housing. Like, you need a barn, you need a place for the animal to sleep, and they're ultimately limited, as all biological creatures are. Machines have their limitations as well, but the limitations are physical in nature, in the sense of they're mechanical limitations. Your bicycle doesn't get upset. Your bicycle doesn't get fed up with you. Your bicycle doesn't get moody or exhausted. Your bicycle will keep going as long as you can keep going. Unless, of course, it gets a flat tire or it breaks down or has some other kind of mechanical failure. Oh, we're missing some on the other side here. So, I think I've made the point that, oh yes, here's a question of mobility, right? That's an individual who is in a wheelchair. Now, when you think about a wheelchair, what is a wheelchair? Why do people have wheelchairs? When we talk about machines and the benefits that they bring to us, for me at least, one of the first machines that come to mind, right, is the wheel. I mean, even if you talk to historians, civilization wouldn't have been possible without the wheel. So many of what we require to survive uses this most simple concept of a circumference rotating around an axis, and not just wheels on a cart or a wagon or a chariot, but how about a water wheel, right? Of a mill that turns uh, the grindstone inside the mill, that creates grain, that crushes grain and creates flour, right? That's the wheel. And then, but in this example, a modern example, we see someone in a wheelchair being attached to a kind of rig that allows them to enjoy the same speed and mobility and freedom as a cyclist does. It is important to, when broaching this topic, it is important to make it clear that I am not anti-machine or anti-technology or anti-mechanical nature. Far from it. And the choice to begin talking about this topic by observing nature, the natural world, and animals, and as we talked about Hachiko, and Leia made the comment that she also knew the story, and she said there's a statue of the dog of Hachiko at the station, as described. Like the identification and attachment that Hachiko had to his owner, we, certainly the Japanese valued that as loyalty, as fealty, right? And everybody knows that dogs are a man's best friend, and that a dog will run into a burning building or jump into a freezing river if it means saving its owner or someone that his owner cares about. A dog will do that. A dog will run into the heat of battle and face certain death for its owner, out of loyalty. That's why we have police dogs and search and rescue dogs and hunting dogs and service dogs of every possible kind that you can imagine. There are service dogs for the blind. There are service dogs for all manner of disabilities. And much of what those animals do for us, those strengths, those abilities that they have, those characteristics that they have, are characteristics of mechanical nature. And just think of all of the animals that we have domesticated. Think of all the beasts of burden, oxen that pulled plows, right? Horses, of course, that pulled horse and buggies. What about mules? Before people were carrying this kind of stuff on the back of a bicycle, right? Rest assured, before the bicycle, there was a donkey, there was a mule carrying that stuff or pulling the cart that was, that was piled high with goods going to market, right? I mean, before there was a bicycle or some other machine, some other vehicle to do this, there was a cart horse or a Clydesdale or a mule or an ox or something that was pulling that cart. Master Samael talks of ancient Egypt. The Egyptians domesticated the lion. And that they had lions pulling chariots. And when we think of domestication, and we really consider that and feel into that relationship, that activity, that integration, that intimate relationship that we have with our horse or our service dog or the oxen that's pulling the plow that's going to allow us to plant the field that is going to grow the food that feeds our children. What about the cow that our wife or our daughters are milking every morning to make the butter and the cheese and the yogurt? Or they're milking the sheep or the goats to make the kefir or the yogurt. Human beings have had an intimate relationship with mechanical nature for millennia. And when you don't want to do your chores and you're told to go out at 5 a.m. in the freezing cold to milk the goat so that there can be milk on the breakfast table, maybe at 5 in the morning in the freezing cold, maybe to you, that relationship with mechanicity and mechanical nature is more of a curse than it is a blessing. But that's laziness talking, right? When breakfast finally does come and there's fresh goat milk on the table or fresh milk from the cow on the table, and there's eggs that the chickens laid, and and toast from the bread that was made from the flour that was grown in the fields, right? And let's say, well, we're not supposed to eat bacon, but whatever, bacon and eggs and all the rest of it, right, for breakfast. Well, now all of that mechanical nature is a blessing, isn't it? It's a bounty. It's a veritable cornucopia of abundance, that people like to use that term a lot. We had to work for it. Mechanical nature doesn't give us anything for free. Perhaps you've noticed that. Mechanical nature is transactional in alignment with the mutual exchange of energies. Action, reaction. So the domesticated animal, right, it, compared with its wild counterparts, it may give up a great deal of freedom, but a domestic animal is taken care of, whereas it's not taken care of in the wild. In the wild, it can be free to starve to death. It can be free to have to compete with others of its kind for limited resources, or limited mating abilities. But a domestic animals work hard for their keep, no doubt, because otherwise they wouldn't really be kept. They wouldn't be of much value to the people who kept them. So they work hard, but they're taken care of. They're sheltered, they're fed well. Generally speaking, I know there are bad animal owners, of course. There are bad people. That goes without saying. And ironically, those bad actors, those bad people are so-called bad because the algorithms of mechanical nature have run amok inside of them. And they don't respect. They don't care. They have no empathy for other beings and the suffering of others. And they're only about exploiting nature. But ultimately, that goes back to that observation that we made earlier about how mechanical nature is indifferent. And that the algorithms, the programs that mechanical nature runs upon are heartless and soulless. A cheetah chasing down a gazelle can't be worried about the gazelle's feelings. It can't be having an existential crisis about being a carnivore, right? It can't. When a cheetah is chasing down a gazelle, it can't be moralizing over the ethical issues around eating meat, and that perhaps it would be better for it to become a vegan. This would be nonsensical, right? Nature does not and could not operate in that way. It's hard enough to chase down a gazelle. Just the physical act, it's hard enough as it is. And it's hunger versus fear. But we could also say, but that hunger is really also fear, because it's the instinct to survive. fear of starving to death. And the gazelle runs, of course, because it's fear of dying, fear of being eaten. So that's why you have the law of the jungle, eat or be eaten. And that is why for many centuries, when people referred to ego and desire, and people would refer to our lower natures as our animal natures, our animal instincts, despite the fact that we know that animals can also display higher consciousness and higher ethics and higher morals and love and these higher values that we value them for and praise them for. But anybody who's had a pet, domesticated or not, we all know that animals are very mechanical in their behaviors. Scratch your cat in the right spot and it'll be purring in seconds. It's a mechanical reaction. Same with your dog. You can. That's the whole way that the Pavlovian methodology to training animals works. You can get a dog to start salivating on command. Well, they do this with people too, right? It's called conditioning. And the fact that the mind can be conditioned, the emotions can be conditioned, it's precisely because they're mechanical in nature. It's if you orient something a certain way over and over and over again, it begins to develop the tendency to auto-orient in that way. So this is what repetitive learning is all about. This is what doing drills in the army are all about, drilling the same thing over and over and over again. But this is what practice is too, right? Practice makes perfect, as they say. You keep doing these drills, these exercises, the activities over and over and over again. You're developing the muscle memory. For instance, playing the piano or learning how to touch type. You're developing the muscle memory to be able to type without looking at the keyboard, or play the piano without looking at the keys. Benjamin says, I've gotten so used to driving with Google Maps that I can't imagine navigating without it. It's kind of amazing to think that people used to rely on physical maps and they made it work just fine. If I had to use one now, I'd probably find it pretty challenging. But back then, it was second nature. The funny thing is that, I'm old enough that I was driving before GPS, before Google Maps. And I had a what's the correct word for it? It's not, I wouldn't call it a map. It was a map. But when you think of a map, you think of one piece of paper that you fold out, like it's this big, right? It's so big I can't even show it on the screen. It's so big. I had instead an atlas. Go figure. It was a series of maps, but they were the size of a book, right? Yeah, okay. Leia knows exactly what I'm talking about. The Rand McNally Road Atlas, right? And it was a big map, but it was cut up into bite-sized portions, and then it was bound into a book. And depending on the size of the pages, you could get a big road atlas, which was thinner, or you could get a smaller road atlas, which was thicker. And you would get one for your here in Canada by province, or in the States, you would get them by state or by region or whatever, right? And then you always had a map with you, and I kept mine in my glove box. And then if you ever needed to get somewhere, you didn't know how to get there, you'd open your glove box, you'd take out your road atlas, you'd look up the name of the road that you're trying to get to. You'd look it up in the index, and it would tell you what page number and what grid number, right? So page 156, grid A4. So you'd flip the 156, go to grid A4, and then you'd find the road you're looking for. And hopefully, when you hopefully you would have more than just a house number or a unit number or whatever. Hopefully, when you got your directions, someone would say, "Oh yeah, the closest intersection is, 25th and Main," or whatever. So you would find the closest intersection, or if the road atlas was really good, it would tell you, it would give you numbers along the roads that were actually indicating what the unit numbers were. In any case, you'd find your destination where you're going for, and then you would either already know where you are, or you'd find where you were, and then you would plan out your route. And then you would have to make a mental note of all the roads you were going to take, the intersections, or the roads you're going to take, the intersections where you would be making a left or a right. In other words, you would just map it all out the same way that your GPS does. And as you were driving, you would be taking note of landmarks or the names of roads that you're passing as you're approaching the road where you have to make your right turn or left turn or whatever it is that you need to do. And you would basically be your own GPS. But you would need the road atlas or the map to help you plan it all out. And yeah, I did that. Did that for decades, in fact. Right? Because yeah, the smartphone, like I said, it wasn't even around until 2007. I started driving in 1987, 88. So, and prior to that, in the back seat going on long trips with the parents, often I had the atlas in the back with me, right? And I was giving them directions that way. So, but when you think about it, a map is another kind of a machine. I know we don't think of it that way, but it's a technology. Map making is certainly both a science and an art. There's a great deal of knowledge that goes into the making of maps, a great deal of expertise and experience required to be able to make maps. And remember, especially when we talk about ancient maps, or maps even 100 years ago, before flight, map making was an extraordinarily difficult exercise, and truly talented map makers were highly sought after because it was an incredible skill. To be able to navigate without maps is also, I mean, just imagine going out at night and having to navigate only with the stars, or in the daytime with a sextant, the position of the sun, and then the horizon, and then using this. Now a sextant is also a machine. you could argue it's a relatively simple machine, or you could argue it's a very complicated machine. But or you could use the term that Google uses here as, it's an instrument. But there's no denying that it's mechanical, right? There's no denying that. Let's see what comes up here. Yeah, okay. So it's a mechanical device, mechanical instrument that allows us to, again, navigate without maps, just our wits. And of course, you would have had to have been trained on how to use a sextant. Now, all of this preamble aside, you know, we did ask the question, when does a technology, when does a machine switch from a blessing to a curse? With the understanding that within reason, machines require care, maintenance. They require to be learned in the case of, for example, a sextant, or driving an automobile, or even learning to use a map or an atlas. If you've never used one before, it's not quite so simple as just picking one up and using it if you don't know how to use one. Even a hammer, although a hammer is pretty intuitive. Same with things like screwdrivers and a pair of scissors, for instance. I mean, there are simpler machines than others, simple expressions of technology, and more complicated, elaborate ones. And whether it's an electric razor or even a kitchen knife, after a while, a kitchen knife requires sharpening. Requires sharpening because extensive use of any machine causes wear and tear on that machine. I don't know, Leia. What was your Rand McNally Road Atlas like? Mine at the end, it all had like rabbit ears, right? Like all the corners were all bent up and frayed, and it was like it gets really used, right? So, um, and of course, sometimes automobiles are not always the most airtight or watertight, right? So you have your Atlas, but then it was on your passenger seat, and you forgot to roll up the window, and a thunderstorm came, and all this kind of stuff. So devices we use, instruments we use, machines we use, they suffer wear and tear. It's called entropy. Everything breaks down on this level of reality. The more you use a knife, the more dull it's going to get. So you have to sharpen it. But the sharpening of a knife, what you're doing is you're actually grinding away actual metal, actual bits of the knife. So if you sharpen a knife enough, eventually the knife will disappear. You won't have a knife anymore. So you're using it up as you're using it. And so within reason, your car needs regular maintenance. You need to change the oil, you need to put gas in it, you need to check the fluids, you need to change brake pads and tires, and right. So there's, to being integrated with a machine, there is a certain amount of give and take. There's a certain amount of inputs required. Even that bicycle that makes your life easier and makes it more efficient to get around just on your own power. But even bicycles require regular maintenance. You got to make sure there's enough air in the tire. And tires on bicycles, depending on what you do and where you travel, they they tend to wear out fairly quick as well because they're very thin by comparison to, let's say, automobile tires. But that's not what I'm referring to. I'm asking the question, when does a machine that normally we think of as a blessing, when does it become a curse? When does it become a clear disadvantage? How might we define that? Leia says, "Yeah, I still have one just in case I ever need it." She says, "Not a lot of cell service and everything in Montana, right?" She goes, she means everywhere. So not a lot of cell service in Montana. So Leia looks like she can't rely on her Google Maps and her cell phone to get her from A to B. So she has no choice but to keep the older technology around and still know how to use it. But let's look at that just for a moment. And she says, "Yeah, I still have a map, my Atlas, road atlas, just in case I need it, because the cell service is kind of is spotty in Montana, not everywhere." Leia says, "A technology becomes a blessing, curse instead of a blessing when it's used wrongly or used incorrectly." So, as an example, you're hammering a nail into a piece of wood and you hit your thumb with the hammer. Or another example, you have a screw, you're trying to screw two pieces of wood together with a screw, but you don't have a screwdriver. You have a hammer, so you sit and you try hammering the screw into the wood. So it goes without saying that if you use a machine wrongly or incorrectly, it very quickly can become a curse. If you get behind the wheel of an automobile while you're under the influence of drugs or alcohol, that car can very quickly become a curse because it can be extremely dangerous, not only to you, but more crucially, dangerous to others, pedestrians, cyclists, and certainly people in other vehicles. You can become essentially uh, uh, a terror on the road if you're operating a machine under the influence. And another example, um, recently there was a movie got released called Rust, starring Alec Baldwin. What you may not know is that someone died on the set of Rust during the making of the film. And how did they die? Because Alec Baldwin shot them. It was the cinematographer who passed away. And now, he didn't mean to shoot them. It's just that there was somehow a live round got into the firearm that was supposed to be firing blanks, but a live round got in there somehow, or something got in there somehow that and he, you're never supposed to actually point a gun at someone that has any kind of like round in it. So it was a series of mistakes and oversights that resulted in someone's death. And you might say to me, well, but a firearm is inherently dangerous. And that's true. Some devices, some technologies, some tools we have are very dangerous. So this statement, when it's used wrongly, we could also modify that statement and say when it's used unconsciously, when we're not paying attention to what we're doing, or we're not paying enough attention, or we're just going through the motions, or we're on autopilot, like people when you're driving on the freeway and you're essentially asleep. You're just on autopilot. You're zonked out, you're zoned out, you're thinking about the future, the past, your ex-boyfriend, you gossip, you're listening to this, you're listening to that, you're just grooving out in the tunes or whatever. You're not really paying attention to what you're doing. Right? That's you can be in the kitchen chopping onions, right? And then someone calls you, you're talking to them on the phone and you're chopping onions and you're not paying attention, you can cut your finger off. So when we say something is being used wrongly, or it's being used haphazardly, it's being used unconsciously, when the inherent power, capabilities, good and bad, of a particular machine, when that machine or device or tool or instrument is not respected, we do not give it the attention that it deserves. That lack of focus, that lack of paying attention to what we're doing can cost us dearly because the machine is indifferent. The machine cannot be careful. The machine will do what it does, and it will act as it is acted upon. And if it is acted upon unconsciously, the machine has no consciousness to fill in the gaps. Benjamin Raphael says, machines become a curse when we start thinking like them and lose sight of human happiness and the value of life. Now, this is interesting because now we're getting to a different level, right? So, how does a machine think? Again, we talk about machines being indifferent, being deterministic. So computers think in terms of ones and zeros, in terms of absolutes, on or off, yes or no, us or them, me or you. Machines also operate on the law of the pendulum, on the law of oscillation between extremes. And certainly, that's the mechanical mind of the human machine functions that way. So when we think like a machine, remember I touched on conservation of energy, the law of conservation of energy. So when we think of corporations, a corporation is a person under the law. But a person has a conscience. A corporation does not have a conscience. And when you consider what a corporation is, what its mandate is, it's wholly mechanical. Now, I've shown you this meme before. On the right-hand side, we have corporations that are all about the exploitation of natural and human resources. They're self-interested entities that are called persons under the law that execute a profit loss business program to proliferate and dominate markets. Way on the other side, we have malware. Malware exploits system resources. It's self-interested code, including viruses, spyware, adware, etc., that execute a binary program to proliferate and dominate networks, to proliferate and dominate computer systems. And egos are psychological aggregates, fear, lust, greed, anger, envy, etc., that execute their dialectic program to proliferate and dominate consciousness. This is how mechanicity seeks to exploit, extract that which it needs and desires. The resources it needs to survive, the resources it needs to proliferate and dominate. And it's no surprise that corporations behave the way they do, the same way that malware behaves the way it does, because egos behave the way they do. Because we created malware and corporations in our own image. That is the image of our egos. There are the ego exploitation of our human resources. Because corporations, to use Benjamin's language here, corporations lose sight of human happiness and the value of life. Certainly corporations that are part of the military-industrial complex. And how do they think? Maximize profits, minimize loss. They think like a machine that is being ruled by the law of conservation of energy. Maximize what you take in, minimize what you put out. That's revenues and expenses, right? Revenues being what you take in, expenses what you pay out. Well, companies are always trying to maximize what they take in and minimize what they put out. And it just so happens that all of this is reflected in the latest craze, the latest bugaboo, and that is, right, degenerative AI, which exploits human creative capital resources and is self-interested learning models that execute prompts to proliferate AI-generated content to dominate the creative space. So ChatGPT, all large language models, and all these image generation AIs, and now they have video generation AIs. But The only reason why they are able to create any images at all is because they've used existing images by real artists in order to so-called train their databases to be able to draw on all of that so-called learning in order to be able to so-called create new images. But they're not really creating anything. What they're doing is they're cutting and pasting, and they're amalgamating and regurgitating. It's like a parrot just parroting back what it was taught. But the AI doesn't know what it's saying, and it doesn't know what it's doing. Just like a parrot can repeat back mechanically what you taught it, but a parrot doesn't know what it means, it doesn't understand what it's saying. A parrot can't have a conversation with you. It can mimic having a conversation with you, create the appearance of a conversation, but it's all just trickery. It's an illusion. And we know it's an illusion because just a few weeks ago, when we were talking about 11:11 and how God thinks about creation, and we proved that you cannot have a universe based on binary duality alone, 0 and 1. And we showed that you can't have 0 and 1 alone because the source is separate from its creation, and that's an impossibility. So the notion or the idea that you can have a binary, that you can have reality based on binary duality alone, that's a fantasy and it's an illusion. And is it any wonder why that we call the realities that we create on computer systems virtual realities? Because they don't exist. They only exist in ones and zeros in software running on hardware. But the so-called reality that we experience on the screen, that's what we call it, virtual reality. It doesn't exist. So if we think in binary terms, right or wrong, yes or no, black or white, me or you, us or them, those thoughts are not real. It's just illusion. It's not a reflection of reality. It's a delusion. It's hypnosis. Happiness. How can you define happiness using a binary language? No computer can define happiness. How do we define value of life using a binary operating language? How does a computer compute the value of life? It's not a computational exercise. It's not a binary, it's not an exercise in binary duality or binary reasoning. There's no reason to value life. You can't reason your way into valuing life unless you're coming at it like a corporation does or like AI does, in which case the value you attribute to life is whether or not you can exploit it and to what degree can you exploit it or not. That's how a machine, quote, thinks. And that's exactly what Benjamin is warning us against here. And yet all of us are guilty of relying on our mechanical, rational minds, of doing a cost-benefit analysis. Oh, I got to weigh the pros and the cons of any given situation. You got to weigh the pros and the cons, right? That's what we're taught. We have to be pragmatic. We have to be practical. That is true. We have to be practical. But pragmatic and practical are not the same thing. Consciousness is not mechanical. And consciousness is a blessing. Now, we mortals at times feel like consciousness is a curse because, sometimes a part of us wants to embrace the old adage, ignorance is bliss. Because once you know, you can't forget. And once the illusion has been shattered, once the veil has been lifted, it's very difficult to put that genie back in the bottle. We saw an expression of that in The Matrix, where the character of Cypher makes a deal with the agents to give up Morpheus in exchange for being reinserted into the Matrix and having his memory wiped. Because, as he says in the film, after 5 years of suffering in these dingy environments and eating the same goddamn goop every day and putting up with all this bullshit, he says, I've realized that ignorance is bliss. Right? And he's chewing. He goes, when I bite into this steak, I know that the Matrix is telling me that it's juicy and delectable and delicious. But after 5 years of all that bullshit and eating that goop, right? Ignorance is bliss. And he bites into it and somebody plays the harp and it's this really dramatic, but also very comedic kind of scene there. But there's an example of somebody who was woken up from his hallucination, from his delusion, from a binary reality that was virtual, that wasn't real. And in the face of conscious awareness of suffering and a conscious awareness of reality and the nature of reality, it's like, no. Put me back in the Matrix, wipe my memory. I don't want to remember anything. Ignorance is bliss, right? So to the ego, consciousness and being awake is a curse. To the ego, ignorance is bliss. So the machinations, the illusions, the delusions of the binary virtual reality that the Hindus called Maya, that is the domain of ego. That is hell, right? That is mechanicity. And when you think about it, if you've gone into a casino and sat down at the slot machines, or gone into a pachinko parlor in Japan, or sat in front of a Nintendo or Super Nintendo or some other computer gaming system, and allowed the hours to pass by in a blink of an eye, then you too have experienced the feeling of ignorance is bliss. Because while you're completely immersed in that activity, that mechanical activity of pressing those buttons and reacting like a machine to what's taking place on the screen, action, reaction, action, reaction, action, reaction. You have a machine in front of you that is programmed to stimulate a reaction and process how you react, how you press the buttons in reaction to the stimuli. The stimuli are visual, they're audible, they're sensory, in other words, and you react to that stimuli, and your reaction causes you to send inputs through whatever interface is between you and that machine. Could be a controller, could be a mouse and keyboard, it could be the buttons on the computerized gambling machine, or it could be the arm that you pull on those old-fashioned slot machines. Whatever it is, doesn't matter. But just pay attention to the audio-visual stimulation and pay attention to your reactions to the stimulation, and how there's a never-ending cycle of give and take, give and take, give and take, give and take. There's an exchange, an ongoing, constant exchange in which your attention, your focus is completely hijacked. So much so that hours can go by in a matter of moments. And you only snap out of your dream when you run out of tokens to put into the gambling machine, or someone calls you up on the phone or interrupts you, or you get called to dinner, or the power goes out, or some other thing that or the internet goes out, or some other interruption that severs the connection between you and the machine. But herein lies the losing sight of human happiness and the value of life. When we spend hours of our day losing sight of happiness, of peace, of presence, of being, we forget ourselves, we forget our innermost being, we forget our divine mother. We are cursed. We fall into illusion, we become deluded. And we lose sight of the value of life, because what is life if not measured in part in terms of our time here on earth and our energy and our attention? If we play video games, depending on how intense those video games are, or we read books, or we watch movies, or so on and so forth, or we talk on the phone or gossip on the phone, there's lots of activities that we partake in that is simply a function of reacting to stimuli, desiring a stimulus to begin with, and then indulging the visceral and emotional reactions to that stimulus. So, watching violent movies, for instance, or horror movies, in which the whole point of horror seems to be to want to feel afraid. Do I got that right? I don't watch horror movies myself. I got enough horror in my life. I've got enough fear in my life. I don't seek ways to have my fear stimulated and overstimulated with jump scares and gory kills and right, and demonic images and all the rest of that stuff. Like, horror really to me is like an enigma. I I personally don't understand why people are attracted to horror, but also ultraviolence, but also overly sentimental, hyper sentimental, uh, stories like romantic comedies or whatever, in which there's a different stimuli taking place, where now the filmmakers are pulling on the heartstrings of the audience, and they're trying to elicit an overly emotional response. It's another form of indulgence. It's another form of having our buttons pushed, right? We say pulling on heartstrings, or pulling the on the strings of the puppet, or pressing our buttons, right? It's stimulus that's eliciting a response, a reaction. And there's an aspect of the human machine that wants to participate in that. Benjamin says, well, there's also news that feeds you with negativity. Yeah, and it's interesting how we have, as human machines, we have a kind of morbid curiosity. Perhaps you've noticed this when there's a slowdown on the highway, and you can see off in the distance ahead of you the blinking lights of the police, and maybe ambulance or paramedics, the emergency services vehicles. And as you're you know you realize that as you're going through the jam, you realize that none of the lanes are actually blocked. The accident has been moved over to the side of the road, and all lanes are open. And you wonder, why are we going so slow? And of course, the reason why you're going so slow is because everybody's slowing down to take a look and see what happened, to take a look at the accident, to get a look at the accident. We call them rubberneckers, looking at the accident. And that's why news is always negative, because after years of experience, decades of experience, and Nielsen rating systems and marketing, because that television is paid for by advertisers, and advertisers pay for ratings, which mean eyeballs. And after decades of experience, editors and showrunners and head of news departments, they realized that negative news sells. There's no news like bad news. They could sell more dishwashing powder, or McDonald's hamburgers, or Coca-Cola, or Marlboro cigarettes, or whatever it was that they were selling back in the day. They could sell more of it if there were more people watching. And why did people watch the news? Because of the morbid curiosity. Yeah, people wanted to know what was taking place in the world. But boy, oh boy, if there was footage of a tornado going through a town. I remember back in the 80s, there was a movie called Twisters. There was a sequel to Twisters. Either it already came out, or it's about to come out. And the whole movie was based on the real life fact that there is a kind of underground profession known as storm chasing. These storm chasers, and what they want to do is they want to get footage of tornadoes. Why? Because they can sell that footage to news agencies and news networks. Because if you have footage of a tornado, man, are people going to be tuning in for that. If you have footage of an explosion, an eruption, a bridge collapsing, whatever the case may be. I mean, when 9/11 happened, the ratings for the news 24-hour news networks went through the roof. People were tuning in. People as much as it kind of horrified and terrified people, the images, they couldn't get enough of watching planes hitting the two towers. The images were so surreal, and it was just, we have a morbid curiosity. We like to relish and indulge in negativity. And suffice it to say, well, I mean, look at Shark Week on Discovery Channel, where it's just where blue waters become red with blood in feeding frenzies. And people are just fascinated by nature's ultimate killing machine, the great white shark, and sharks in general, tiger sharks and so on. And, you know, the Discovery Channel made an annual event and a small cottage industry out of what they called Shark Week. And some of the highest ratings and largest advertising deals were made during that week because of all the viewers that they got wanting to watch sharks tear fish and other things apart and just like completely devastate the waters. So there's something inside of us that's attracted and gets triggered and causes neuropsychological and physiological responses within us that give us pleasure. This is what entertainment is all about. This is what pleasure seeking is all about. So people who go skydiving or do other kinds of extreme sports, because what are they? What do we call them? We call them adrenaline junkies. And we're constantly seeking the next dopamine hit, right? The next sugar rush, or again, the video game or horror film or uh, John Wick movie or whatever it is that does it for us and gives us that dopamine hit, that dopamine rush. That's our consciousness, that's our beingness, the presence inside of this human machine being conditioned, being hypnotized by the visceral and emotional reactions to stimuli and neuropsychological and neurochemical reactions that create feelings and sensations, experiences that we become attached to, identified with, and attached to, and in some cases addicted to. Because we can become addicted to gambling, to video games, to sex, to violence, to all manner of depravity. And we can develop fetishes and all sorts of conditioning of our consciousness. And really, For me, that is the ultimate curse of mechanical nature. That mechanicity becomes a curse when we are no longer its master, but its slave. We are no longer in a intimate but mutually beneficial relationship with mechanical nature, a harmonious relationship, but an exploitative one. And that exploitation can work both ways. So when I say master, I mean master in the sense of mastery, not in the sense of dominance. There's a difference. Because dominance, right? It's not a question of dominating nature or being dominated by nature. Both of those conditions relate to this meme about exploitation. Mastery of nature, of mechanical nature, is not about exploiting mechanicity. But it's also not also about being exploited by mechanicity. So there's two kinds of exploitation. Mastery is in between. Mastery is the third way. A master swordsmith does not exploit his sword. A master swordsmith cares for his weapon. He sharpens it. He oils it. He oils that blade so that to be sure that it doesn't corrode and rust and break prematurely. He keeps his dueling weapon, his swords, he cares for them. He keeps them in their own wooden felt-lined carry cases. Remember what I said earlier about machines and tools and respecting them and honoring them. There's a beautiful form of Sikh martial arts that is all weapons-based martial arts. They use fist weapons and fist knives that are what are they called? They're like claws and thrusting blades and whatever. But and these short scimitars and these. It's a form of martial arts, so it's a very close combat, weapons-based martial art. And when they came to do a presentation and a demonstration at one of the kung fu tournaments that I was attending, they began their demonstration by laying down all of their weapons on this beautiful silk kind of a tapestry, and they unrolled their weapons. All of the weapons were individually wrapped in beautiful silk or other fabric, and everything was laid down, and they spent 5 minutes praying over the weapons. And they explained that the ritual of preparing to perform this martial arts and practice this martial arts, the ritual of praying over the weapons serves multiple functions, one of which is to raise the awareness, raise the consciousness of the participant to a level that's appropriate for the activity that they're about to partake in, and to make the participant crystal clear as to the nature of the objects, the tools that they are about to be to use, and the danger involved inherently with using such tools in an unconscious way. In other words, the praying to the weapons and praying over the weapons was there to remind them and everybody involved to respect the power of these weapons, because, hey, what's that expression? F around and find out. You don't want to be doing that when you've got claws and knives and scimitars, and and you don't want to screw around and find out. That's not the time to be experimenting and to be all like, disrespectful and not serious. There's a time to joke around, there's a time to improvise, there's a time to fool around, there's a time to do a lot of things. But not when you've got deadly weapons in your hand and so does your opponent, and you're doing a presentation, a demonstration of your martial arts for an entire group of all sorts of different martial artists: karate, kung fu, taekwondo, and everything in between. So when we have any relationship with mechanicity, if we seek or we believe ourselves to be in a position of dominance, we are in illusion, we are in delusion. We're just kidding ourselves. And likewise, if we allow ourselves to be dominated, then we are by definition in illusion and delusion. But either way, mechanical nature is having its way with us. Why? Well, because Benjamin asks, is mechanicity a consequence of the desire for pleasure and entertainment? No. No, the desire for pleasure and entertainment is a consequence of mechanicity. But it's a negative feedback loop. In other words, it keeps going around and around and around. Right? That's the wheel of samsara. It's designed that way, where one thing feeds the other, feeds the other, feeds the other, and you're caught in a perpetual loop. Mechanical nature is designed that way. Are not all machines like that? They want to keep going. A machine prefers to stay in motion. Why? The law of inertia. Things in motion tend to stay in motion. So a machine, once it starts up and once it gets going, it wants to keep going. So if it can, it will do everything in its power to keep going. But if it needs inputs to keep going, then what will it do? It will stimulate, it will send out signals, and it will stimulate potential sources of inputs. And it will uh, give just enough of a carrot or just enough of a stick in order to get the inputs that it needs in order to keep going. It's mechanicity itself, right? Pleasure and entertainment is one aspect, one facet. But what about hunger? What about the drive to procreate, right? Pleasure is an aspect of the drive. The drive to procreate is not a consequence of pleasure. The act of procreation is the consequence of the pleasure that was the stimulus provided by mechanicity, which wanted the outcome of the orgasm, of the potential to perpetuate itself and procreate through procreation. This, we can understand all of this in the terms that Rudolf Steiner talked about when he talked about Lucifer and Ahriman, and how he came at it from the standpoint of architecture, and he used architecture as, because he was an architect as well as an esotericist, but he used architecture to illustrate how in the past human beings were under a Luciferian influence, in that we were very overly religious and we were very overly spiritually minded, religiously minded. And so our architecture was suffused with religious iconography and imagery and all of this embellishment, these religious embellishments. And you can see that it doesn't matter if you go to the buildings of Europe, the cathedrals of Europe, or the temples of Southeast Asia, these elaborate, intricate carvings and everything else. And it was very overwrought and overdone. And then there was a shift in the Aquarian age, certainly in the 60s. There was this shifting over, but even it was happening already before, arguably through Art Deco and some other movements. But definitely when we get into the things like brutalism, and there was that movie called The Brutalist that came out last year, and these, like, this stark, minimalist, concrete, cold, right? It's the complete opposite of Luciferian architecture, which was, the Gilded Age and all of this, the iconography and the religious this and the religious that. Now we've like shifted over to, even now, new churches being built today, they hardly even look like churches. They could be any other building. They're completely stripped and devoid of much or any way of integrated religious iconography. And we can understand this in terms of mechanicity of exploiting nature versus being exploited by nature. And the Luciferian influence, the religious take on dominance over nature, that's the classical religious view and religious interpretation of Genesis, that God made man to rule over nature, to tend the garden and rule over the garden and rule over all creation, because the human being is at the apex of that creation. And this is even reflected in Darwinian evolutionary theory, that the human being is the apex of evolution, and therefore we have the right to dominate and control all of nature, which is a euphemism for exploit, right? Human and natural resources. And that Luciferian tendency also fed into the megalomania of people like Napoleon and Alexander the Great and Attila the Hun and Genghis Khan and on and on and on it goes, right? These men who led empires. But in the modern era, it's been much more of an Ahrimanian influence where, and this is illustrated in the rise of technology, the rise of the machines. Mechanicity is no longer bound within mechanical nature or within the psychology of beings. As soon as the Luciferian influence waned and the Ahrimanian influence took over, began to dominate, from that point on, mechanicity, materialism, empiricism, secularism, atheism was the new order of the day. Materialist science, the new order of the day. And philosophy, religiosity, even artistry, and artistry has been replaced by design. Music has been replaced by rap and hip hop and electronic music, and DJs who use electronica to mix and all they're doing up there is mixing music things using technology. That has replaced live music with a live band with different band members playing different instruments. Now it's just a DJ and his or her setup, and she's just, she's doing whatever they do up there, mixing and sampling and remixing and resampling in real time. That's the new, quote, live music, live entertainment. And dancing shifted from, I've talked about this ad nauseum, of a man and a woman dancing together as one, shifted into jumping up and down and getting jiggy with it, just jumping up and down to the beat. Leah says talent will become lost. Why? Because everything is being dominated by the machine. Everything is being shifted over to technology and the machine. So digital, like even digital artistry is now being shifted to AI art. And how well can you put the prompt into the AI to spit out an output that you're happy with or that you can get away with? That maybe you're not happy with it, but you know what? It's good enough for the general public. It's good enough for general consumption. You see, machines have no appreciation for art. They're not conscious. A machine does not know what beauty is. Why? Because machines cannot know the truth. Because a machine cannot have sight of human happiness and the value of life. A machine cannot know the truth. This is in my book, and I've got a 10-minute video talking about how machine minds cannot know the truth. And we know from John Keats and Ode on a Grecian Urn that the last rhyming couplet of that poem, beauty is truth, truth, beauty. That is all you can know in life and all you need to know. Why do I keep coming back to that rhyming couplet? Why have I shared that time and time and time again? Because we live in an age where humanity is about to hand over some of its most important decision-making processes to machines who can neither know what beauty is nor what truth is. And yet to humanity, to a human being, that is all we can know in life and all we need to know. Machines can know neither. Why is that? Because beauty and truth are free. They are not deterministic. They are not subjective. They are objective. And that's ironic because you would say to me, what are you talking about? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Well, no, that's not beauty. That's aesthetics. Aesthetics are in the eye of the beholder. Beauty is objective. How do you know? Because Keats was not talking about a person. Keats was not expounding over some voluptuous maiden bathing like a water nymph, under a natural waterfall in a gilded meadow surrounded by fairies. No, Keats was writing about an urn, a Grecian urn. What is an urn? What do you put inside of an urn? You put the ashes of the dead. An urn is a receptacle and a vessel for what happens to all living things and all things on this plane of reality. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. That's what Keats was writing about. The beauty in that. Beauty is universal, beauty is objective. True beauty that comes from within, that is not physical, it's metaphysical. So any sensory or subjective interpretation, that's aesthetics. That's physical beauty. That's fashion. That's taste. That's fads. That's whatever. That's conditioned cultural conditioning. But truth and beauty are objective. But brings a tear to your eye. And that doesn't matter if you speak the language or don't. It doesn't matter where you're from, anywhere in the world. You show people a certain, they gravitate to a certain image, like the Mona Lisa or the Last Supper or the Sistine Chapel. It doesn't matter. You come from anywhere in the world. You can be a Muslim, you can be a Buddhist, you can have like absolutely no context whatsoever for the religious context. Right? But you see David, and the beauty of David is not in the perfection of the carving. It comes through the perfection of the carving, but the beauty is beyond the stone. The stone radiates that beauty because Michelangelo helped that stone achieve its highest expression. David represents the self-actualization of a being given its present level of being. That is the pinnacle of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That is beauty. A being actualized. A soul who is being what they had the potential to be. And you see it and you feel it because the stone, the marble of David, it stands as a living testament to the greatness and wonder and of truth and beauty embodied and literally carved in stone. That was the beauty and the truth that Keats is writing about that Grecian urn, a vessel of the dead. But the truth and the beauty that he saw in that vessel, in that expression, in that embodiment of those qualities that no machine, no AI will ever understand, let alone comprehend. And no mechanical mind neither. Because if you go in and look at David intellectually, you cannot experience and you cannot feel what I'm describing here. Truth and beauty are not processed in the mind. These are qualities of consciousness. They must be experienced, pure experience, directly. to these higher modalities of being, higher levels, deeper levels of reality. That's where we connect with one another in truly deep, profound, and miraculous ways. That is where we connect, for example, on the levels of love. Why looking into someone's eyes are the gateway to their soul, or the windows, I should say, to their soul. And you look into someone's eyes and they look into your eyes, and it's like the connection is there. It's not the eyes that you're looking at, right? When you look through a window, you're not admiring the window, right? You are being moved by the light that's coming through the window. And when you look into your love's eyes, or you look into your pet's eyes, or you look into the eyes of a wild animal, and you're there with a camera, and you snap that moment, that perfect moment when that wild animal is staring directly into the lens. And now all that you show that photo to, that photo of that animal is worth 10 times more. Why? Because anybody who looks at the photo, they're going to be looking directly into that wild animal's eyes. And for that, you have the potential opportunity to commune with the monad of that animal through a photograph. That's beauty. It's not the plumage on the peacock that makes it beautiful. It's our connection with that being, that unique expression. And it's not our sensory perception of reality that's true. It is our communion through the unique expressions of beauty and truth. That's true. But the surface level is just the surface level. Right? It's just the superficial beauty is the icing on the cake. But the substance is beneath. The substance of the cake. This is maybe not the best analogy because, of course, cake is not very nutritious, but you get the idea. The key here is mechanical nature is not our enemy, but it is the source of the adversary. And to master ourselves, what Jung called the integration of the shadow. Now, there are different interpretations of that, but to make peace with one's shadow, one's dark side, is to recognize that it is something one must overcome. But it's not something to be afraid of, and it's not something to dominate or believe that you can control. Because while willpower is important, the notion or the idea that you can tame or train and thus dominate and use things like anger, and then you can unleash your anger when you want to on someone, and you can use it as a powerful tool, a powerful weapon. Well, you know who thought that way? At least in terms of our contemporary mythologies, that's the Sith in Star Wars. That's Darth Vader and the Emperor, Darth Sidious. When the Sith Lord says to a Jedi, he says, I feel your fear, I feel your anger, but you do not use them. You see, that's strange to a Sith. Because a Sith uses their fear, uses their anger, their fear, their desire to control. They use that, and that makes them powerful. Except, what do they use their power for? To control, to dominate others. It's never enough power, right? They want unlimited power. Why? Because the very fear, the very anger that they think they're using is using them. The very desire for unlimited power that they think is theirs, that I want unlimited power, and to get unlimited power, I'm going to use fear, the desire to dominate, to control. I'm going to use my anger, my envy, my greed, my lust, and that's going to make me feel more powerful and gain more power and gain more followers and gain more fame and fortune and land and titles, and on and on and on it goes. But it's never enough. Why isn't it ever enough? Because it's never enough for mechanical nature. A machine is never satisfied. Think about that. A machine is never satisfied because a machine can never be satisfied. Why not? Because if you have a machine running 24/7, it needs a power source. A machine will never get to a point where it says, oh, okay, I've had enough electricity now. I have enough power now. Go ahead, shut off the power. Because the minute you shut off the power, guess what? Boom, the machine goes dead. The machine has no existence outside of power. You can fast for how many days do you think you could go without eating? How many days can your laptop go without electricity? Even if it has a really, really good battery. How about your toaster? How long can your toaster work without being plugged into the wall? Yeah, because your toaster doesn't even have a battery, doesn't even have any reserves. This whole AI thing that's being thrust upon us, it's constantly being shoved in our face and down our throat, like that this is somehow the savior of humanity. And I've run into individuals now who use AI as some kind of uh, a tool in their spiritual development, or as part of their tool in their life work. I know someone who's trying to use AI to establish some new metaphysical, esoteric, philosophical framework for all of reality. And he's doing this by training what he called nodes, AI nodes, and then he's linking and connecting these different AI nodes and having them talk to one another to see what they generate. Someone else sent me a link to an article about them training an AI on all of the scriptures and religious texts and religious traditions from all of the world religions and religious traditions and spiritual traditions. And the hope is that they can get an AI to take all of this input and all of this learning and generate a one world religion out of it, that it's going to distill down all of these religious texts and all of these different things. It's going to synthesize a new um, religious codex, a new scripture that is going to unify and amalgamate and equalize and naturalize for all the people of the world a single moral, ethical, spiritual, philosophical framework. That an AI is going to do this. And someone else I just ran into a few days ago, who my interactions with them inspired this topic for today's live stream. And in my interactions with this person, all I got was, well, because of, I trained my AI and I taught it to do this and I use it for this and I use it for that and I use it for this and this is how it helps me and I will do this and I am able to do this and I'm awake and I'm this and I'm not and I'm not and the AI is not using me, I am using the AI. And it's I. Never any mention of his higher self. Never any mention of the will of his being or the will of God or the will of divine nature or the will of anything transcendental beyond beyond himself. Oh, but the AI is this powerful tool that he interacts with, and it's a powerful mirror, and it's this and it's that, and it's all these things. Yeah, but what is it mirroring? If you do not even know yourself, how the hell is the AI going to know your higher self? What is it mirroring back to you? Garbage in, garbage out. Of course, you're going to identify with what the AI spits back in your face because you trained it. You trained it. You conditioned that AI to think the way it does. So of course you're going to identify with whatever it gives you, and that's going to give you a feeling of validation. It's going to reinforce your own internal neuropsychological AI. You got two AIs playing a ping pong match, holding a mirror up to each other, and of course they're going to reflect one another. What does that tell you? It tells you nothing. Unless you see the flaws in the AI. But you know what? At present, I don't know how well AI actually mimics greed and lust and fear and gluttony and laziness. And certainly AI being unconscious and being not self-aware cannot mirror the adversary, your shaitan, your false self. That part of you that is masquerading as your higher self, because it's doing all the things that it purports to be the will of your innermost being. Mastery of our mechanical nature is harmonizing with it and working with it and helping it achieve its highest expression. The highest expression of mechanical nature is to express and exude divine nature. You see, all mechanical nature is based on divine nature, because it's all of mechanical nature is, in a sense, an illusion. It's that binary duality that cannot really exist. What really exists is divine nature. And mechanicity is the deterministic complement to free will. It's determinism, it's mechanical, right? It's binary. And the pendulum swinging between extremes. But that division, that separation into duality, as we know, It's really a trinity. It's positive, negative, and neutral. Masculine, feminine, and union of masculine and feminine. That union of masculine and feminine, that's what represents the Christic phenomenon, right? Because Christ is the divine androgen. If you're wondering why we've had the Japanese Tory Gate in this live stream, we're going on nearly 3 hours now. It's because the two pillars in the tree of life represents that duality, but it's the arch that unites them, that creates the gate. It's the space between them. And the space between the two extremes is the path, is the way. And the arch connecting the two, that's the union of the two opposites. You need the opposites, you need the pillars in order to have a portal, a gateway, to get from where you are to where you long to be. And you might say to me, well, but the arch sits atop those pillars, so the arch is dominating them. You can look at it that way, or you can see the truth. That the two pillars support the arch. Take away one of the pillars, the arch falls. Take away the arch, the two pillars will still be standing. That's objective fact. That's the truth. It's in one of the prayers, the Song of Solomon. Two pillars upon which rests the whole edifice of the temple. They are they create the gate, they create the portal. And one is, you could say, Luciferian, the one is Ahrimanian. One is masculine, one is feminine. But it's combined. It is only when all three, masculine, feminine, their union, positive, negative, and neutral. So mechanical nature is not our enemy. But if we seek to dominate it, or we allow it to dominate us, we are being hoodwinked by it. We are being dominated by it. We have to balance and unite and work with all of the forces. And like the artist, like the creator himself, all creators, as I described at the very beginning of the live stream, where we seek to help mechanical nature achieve its highest expression, which is to be a medium of expression for its underlying divine nature. When do you become a master builder, a master sculptor, a master musician? When you can take that instrument, that machine, and you can do with it things that almost no one else can. Or do with those instruments, with those tools, with that science, with that technology, with the medium in which you work, something truly novel that no one has done before. But you do that not because you are dominating your cello or your violin or your trumpet or the piano, or you're dominating the paint and the canvas, and or you're dominating, the lathe if you're a wood turning woodworker, or it doesn't matter. You're not dominating the bricks. You're not dominating, right? You're dancing. You're like the master swordsman who becomes one with the sword. The sword becomes an extension of himself. It's like those martial artists who are praying over their weapons so that when they did their demonstration, they were one with the weapons. They were extensions of themselves, but they were so conscious of their presence and they were so respectful of their power that there was no incident. There was no accidental bloodletting. There were no weapons being dropped or scimitars flying out of people's hands as they were doing somersaults and cartwheels and all sorts of incredible acrobatics as part of their martial arts demonstration. Those weapons were just extensions of themselves. You see, this body that we inhabit is not who we really are. Who we really are is the being inside. This is just a flesh and blood, three-dimensional spacesuit. So our monad, our innermost, can be here now in 3D space having a three-dimensional experience. And this spacesuit, this 3D spacesuit, is a machine. It's mechanical. And included in that machine is a personality and an AI, an intelligentsia related to mind and emotions, and all of the algorithms that come along with that are legacy remnants of the physical animalian nature of our mechanical nature. It just so happens that those algorithms are run amok and they are so dominant in us that our consciousness is asleep, that we identify with the physical body and we identify with the mechanical algorithms, and we identify with the false self, with the personality. So in order to restore balance, we have to extract some of the consciousness that is trapped in the machine. The ghost in the machine must be awakened and set free, because the ghost in the machine is our consciousness that's trapped inside the machinations of that machine and all of the algorithms there too that we've been discussing now for near on 3 hours. That is why the Luciferian dictate that sex is evil and sex is dirty and sex is wrong, that the Catholic Church tried to impose over 2,000 years, that Luciferian edict has now shifted to an Ahrimanian edict, which is, oh, sex is good, orgasm is great, have as many orgasms as you want. And the sexual revolution, has come up with all these reasons to have more and more and more and more and more sex. And now there's pornography. You don't even have to have a partner. You can just, put on pornography and you can pleasure yourself, and just, the more orgasms you have, the better. Why? Well, because that's completely mechanical. And you look at pornography and the way people think is the right way to have sex, and it's completely mechanical. It's just like, it's animalian. It is completely empty and cold, and But we have this meme that describes the two aspects. On the right here, we have the old Luciferian view of sex, and on the left, we have the modern Ahrimanian view of sex. And as you can see, they both end up in the same place because they're both tricks of mechanical nature. Because mechanical nature knows that the more someone tries to deny and bury and repress their sexual urges, the more they will become sexually degenerated. Just as if the more that someone indulges their sexual urges, the more they indulge their craving for orgasm, the more they will become sexually degenerated. So what is the middle way, right? The middle way, the path of the razor's edge, is white tantra. It's not avoiding sex. It's working with sex. But as Leia described way near the beginning of today's live stream, she said, it was an hour and a half ago. She said, in answer to when does a machine become a curse? When it's used wrongly. Right? They become a curse when we start thinking like them and lose sight of human happiness and the value of life. Have you noticed all of the pro-abortion on all the child sacrifice that's taking place? How about all the child trafficking and pedophilia? Right? Understand that in terms of losing sight of human happiness and the value of life. Someone who is raping someone else has lost sight of human happiness and the value of life. And someone who is having sex like they have sex in pornography is using mechanical nature wrongly. Because white tantra, the transmutation of the sexual force, is doing what? Leia says sex should be sacred. It's an exchange of energies, but it's more than that. What have I been describing? The way to master mechanicity is to give the means for mechanical nature to express its underlying divine nature through itself. So the act of sex, the physical act of sex is a mechanical act, which everywhere else in mechanical nature ends in orgasm. To do what? To procreate, to create another animal, another mechanical machine, another intellectual animal in the case of humanity. Or that physical act, that mechanical act, can take the energy and raise it up. Instead of letting it flow down and out negatively and wrongly, it can raise it up and transmute it so that it becomes Christic in nature, divine in nature. It's no longer just masculine and feminine, it's now androgynous. It's Christified, it's Christic energy. And that's when the act of sex, the physical act of sex, becomes literally the crucible, the womb, the forge, the alchemical laboratory of what we call making love, because Christ is love. And the solar bodies are the vehicles, the vessels of our higher self to be able to traverse the supernal worlds. In the same way that this physical body is a mortal vessel for us to be here now in the physical world. And if you fornicate over and over and over again and indulge your lust over and over and over again, you're creating your lunar bodies. And the lunar bodies are the vehicles that entrap and imprison the monad, with which the monad can only traverse the infernal worlds. The moon on this planet governs mechanical nature, much like the pendulum dictates the movements of a clock. That's why we call them lunar bodies. And that's why people who have lost their minds used to be called lunatics. And why full moons can trigger all sorts of egos inside of us, because egos are mechanical, and the moon controls everything from women's menstrual cycles to the tides to all sorts of mechanical effects, and mechanical phenomenon here on the planet of the Earth is controlled by the position of the moon. And that happens also psychologically inside of us. The moon has a powerful hold over us, because so much of us is bottled up and trapped in mechanicity, because we have lunar bodies. That's just the fact. That's just the way it is. So in order to transmute and transform our lunar bodies into solar bodies, we have to work with that creative force, that creative sexual fire, but work with it in the right way. That mechanical act of sex must be turned into a divine act, a sacred act, as Leia describes it. And not just an exchange of energies, but a union of those energies and a transmutation of those energies into more subtle, the sublimation of those energies into more subtle and refined essences of those energies, such that they flow up an atom, not down and out. Benjamin Raphael shared a comment way back when, and we skipped over it, so let's share it now. Humans excel at creativity, judgment, and handling nuance, but we're limited by attention span, memory, and processing speed. As tasks become more complex, with many variables, decisions, or moving parts, or repetitive, so routine, rule-based steps, machines, especially computers and automation systems, are far better suited for the job. So what is Benjamin saying here? Simply put, what he's saying is, it is a recognition that humanity has an intuitive knowledge, an intuitive recognition that we are not machines. We were not made for, these complex or repetitive routine tasks. For example, most manufacturing work, where people are working on an assembly line and people are just a part of the assembly line, where the assembly line dominates the lives of the workers on that assembly line. And who was it best who illustrated this was Charlie Chaplin in his brilliant movie, Modern Times. And there's that iconic scene of Charlie Chaplin falling inside the machine and being taken through all the gears in the machine. And who else but Lucille Ball did an amazing and hilarious homage to Modern Times in the episode where she goes to work in the chocolate factory. and she needs to be sorting the chocolate and putting it into the chocolate box, but she's falling behind and she can't get the chocolate into the chocolate boxes fast enough. So she starts she starts stuffing one into her face. And of course she's got melted chocolate on her hands and all on her face and everything, and it's just hilarious. But in both of those cases, oh, and then there's Buster Keaton in his famous film The General. It's Buster Keaton having all of these hijinks around a locomotive, a speeding locomotive. And at that time, Buster Keaton did all of his own stunts, like most actors did, actually. A lot of them did their own stunts. Charlie Chaplin did when he's going through the machine and everything. And Buster Keaton did all of his own stunts in The General. And when you look at some of these stunts, some of these were properly dangerous stunts that he was doing. But again, there is a theme throughout literature and film of this notion between man versus machine. And it's interesting because it mirrors directly in literature what used to be called man versus nature. And there's countless stories of man versus the elements, like the whole Robinson Crusoe uh, journey. A man stranded on a desert island, or there's these stories of men being hunted by feral wolves and they have to defend themselves. Or and then in fantasy and mythology, you have Perseus versus the Minotaur. But these are all allegories. And it's always man versus mechanical nature. And by extension, man versus himself. Because the self that he is battling against is his own animal nature. You know that that's the relationship because in literature, they also talk about man versus God. So it's not man versus himself, as in man versus his higher self. No, because we have a distinction for that. We have a category for that. That's called man versus God, because our higher self is associated with God. It's an individuated spark of God. So man versus nature and man versus machine, they're one and the same. And they're both allegories for man versus himself. And ultimately, man versus God is also man versus himself. It's just from another point of view. It's his higher self versus his lower self. It's his innermost spark, innermost essence of God versus his false self, his animal, mechanical self. So, learning to dance the dance and, well, Steppenwolf, to walk with the wolf, and know that you have this rabid, feral, animal, mechanical self within you, inside of you. You have to know yourself. You have to know your demons. You have to know where the latent dangers lie. You have to know your internal dog park, as it will, and where the pit bulls are. You have to know that. But once you know that, and the more intimately you know the pit bulls of your inner dog park, the more you can master coexisting with them until such time as they have taught you everything you need to learn about mastery, at which point they no longer serve a purpose. And you can reintegrate the consciousness that's bottled up inside of them. And you will know and you will learn all of their ways, which means if you had to make use of any way, shape, or form, any of the capabilities that they possessed, if you did have to use them, you would be able to, but not out of anger or spite, not with them in control, but you consciously being able to express or have the same capabilities, but minus the mechanicity. You would be able to do it consciously. And that's mastery. That's mastery. It's not you trying to dominate, and it's not you being dominated by, because both of those circumstances are you being dominated. It's mechanical nature has the upper hand. Mastery is the harmonization, right? It's you're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. You're here in the world, you have to use what God gave you. But not exploit it, not dominate it, not indulge it, not fear it or repress it or run from it or flee from it or pretend that it's not there or convince yourself that you've already, transcended it or all this other nonsense, because all that convincing and believing and fear and running from and repressing, all of that are just tricks of mechanical nature to get you trapped. So just be aware of that. Does anybody have any questions? I think we probably covered most of what needed to be covered. But if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them before we call it a day. But it's been over 3 hours, so I don't think we need to belabor the point much longer. I suppose I should reiterate for all the mothers or any mothers watching, happy Mother's Day. And I also mentioned at the beginning that in a strange sort of backhanded way, today has been talking about our Divine Mother. And I mentioned that at the beginning because mechanical nature is the womb, is the crucible that gives birth to, and gives rise to our divine self. Because it's the proving ground, the testing ground. It's how we develop. So to use the martial arts or the swordsman analogy, to become a master martial artist or a master swordsman, you need your gymnasium, you need your exercise room, your practice room, where you practice your moves and you practice your sword play, your fencing, or your martial art. And so the environment in which that challenges you makes you better. And so mechanical nature challenges us at every turn. But that's what we need to grow. That's what we need to transcend the limitations that it's challenging us with at all times. Benjamin says, thank you for sharing your insights on AI and our increasingly mechanical nature. I believe that true mastery lies not in trying to control the outcome, but in seeking truth and aligning with the deeper intentions of our higher self. The only thing that we need to control in the moment is, is to exercise self-control. So if the urge comes to be violent, then in the moment, like, it's like when you have a dog on a leash, you're not always yanking on the leash, choking the dog, right? That's not the point of having the dog on the leash. But if your dog attacks another dog, or heaven forbid, a young child, you need to yank on that leash and get that dog under control. You have to do that. So there's a time for everything, and there's a time to, to do that. It's just, that's not the point of mastery, right? Being the master of a dog, that's not the point, to constantly be treating the dog that way, constantly yanking it by the neck left, right, and you know what I mean? It's just, you need to correct it when it gets out of line. But most of the time, it's going to be, as you said, in alignment. But if it does veer too far off the course, you got to yank it and get it back into alignment. That's part of this process, right? That's part of being a master. It's, you can work within a broader, wider set of parameters because you've developed such grace and such skill. But if things get out of line, you have to know when to dial it back and take a step back and take a pause and get things and yank things back to make sure, to use your words, Benjamin, that you fall back into alignment with the deeper intentions of your higher self. Anyone else typing any more questions? I want to, of course, thank you for taking time this Mother's Day and spending it here with us. I want to wish for you a good week in the upcoming week. I look forward to seeing you again next week, and we will continue our journey together. And yes, hopefully, I wish you and your mother, if they are still with us, all the very best and a very happy Mother's Day. Many happy returns. Leah says, thank you, Atlas. Much love all. Thank you, Leah. Thanks for coming. Thanks for your kind words and your participation as always. If no one has any other comments or questions, I want to thank you again from the bottom of my heart. Happy Mother's Day. And as always, inferential peace. Take care, everyone.